We are going to take a slightly different change of tack now, and we are very pleased to do a welcome back again to Renee Young. Now, Renee is wearing many hats for us today, and the first is for the HMO Network, and we're going to be considering the issue with regards to private rentals as well. We've had a focus on social properties so far. We had the BRE cost of living report come out earlier this year, and that sort of indicated that actually maybe the social housing isn't the issue, and we've got a bigger problem within private rental. And to sort of start looking at that and start sort of giving us some insight from that perspective, can we please welcome Renee to the floor, please?
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be welcomed back to the Property Care Association and to be able to come and speak on behalf of several things that I'm involved in. So I'm Renee Young. I have worked in housing for about 19 years doing a lot of different roles. So today I am looking at, is the issue of dampness more prevalent in private rented properties, and what are the challenges of addressing dampness in these buildings? So for private landlords, there is a whole raft of legislation to adhere to when it comes to being a private landlord. We've had the Housing Health and Safety Rating Systems, HHSRS, which was introduced in the Housing Act 2004. The standard set out 29 different hazards, excess cold, falls, damp, mould, growth, and which landlord should avoid having in their property. There's also things like structural problems that could cause damp issues, and these are covered by the Section 11 of the Landlord and Tenants Act 1985. Then we had things like decent homes in June 2023, and this review considered a range of changes, including keeping a reasonable state of repair for a home to be considered decent, as we've heard earlier today. We've also had things like minimum energy efficiency standards, the MEES regulations, where it's unlawful to let a private property with an EPC rating below E at the moment, but that minimum is going to be raised to C by 2030. We've also had things like defective premises, where a landlord fails to carry out a repair that they ought to have known about, or they did know about, and that they haven't. And that includes people that undertake work for landlords on their behalf, so contractors, builders, and things like that. Then we've got other legislation that comes into the mix with Occupiers Liability Act, we've got construction design management regulations, then other considerations like mortgage conditions, insurance terms and conditions. Then there's policy changes, law and interpretation. So you can see that there's quite a big range that a private landlord needs to be aware of, and sometimes we do have a lot of accidental landlords that come into the market, and there's no excuse in law of I don't know what I don't know. The government has also issued new guidance on understanding and addressing the health risks of damp and mould as a direct report of the coroner's report, as we've heard about the tragic and sad death of Awab Ishwaq in 2020. In the government's latest guidance for understanding and addressing damp and mould in the home, Mr Gove wrote that landlords must ensure that the accommodation they provide is free from serious hazards, including damp and mould, and that homes are fit for habitation. He continued that this guidance also makes clear tenants should not be blamed for damp and mould. So when we have a look at the figures, what do they actually say about, is it more prevalent in private rented homes? So having a look at that, we have an average of 3.6% of private rented sector properties that were estimated to have dangerous types of mould and damp, according to new government figures. The report found that the local authorities enforced against 41,286 properties in the last 3 years, mostly through informal action. This equates to around about 55 properties per local authority per year if you divide that up across the UK. According to the English Housing Survey, around 904,000 homes in England had damp problems in 2021. Of these, it was 11% in the private rented sector, compared with 4% in the social rented sector and 2% in owner-occupied homes. But how is this measured and recorded? Is this an accurate picture? Because the proportion of private rented homes with at least one of the most serious Category 1 hazards has more than halved over the last decade, from just over 28% to 2009 to just over 13% in 2019. There's obviously a lot more that can be done. Damp and mould is one of the 29 hazards assessed under the HHSRS system. Local authorities have had a duty under the Act to take enforcement action on Category 1 hazards and a power to take enforcement action on Category 2 hazards. But we found that the figures revealed that on average 3.6% of private rented sector properties were estimated to have Category 1 damp and mould hazards. The lowest estimate was 0% and the highest estimate was 27%. So you can see how these fluctuate from the way that they were recorded. The government says it was not possible to establish in their report an average estimate for the proportion of private rented sector properties with Category 2 damp and mould hazards. That was due to a lack of clarity in how local authorities were expected to estimate their Category 2 damp and mould hazards. Considering all this, does it really reflect an accurate picture where we have so many local authorities across the UK reporting in different or on different systems, as we've already been talking about this morning with Alan's speech? They're in a stark contrast to the popular belief by tenant groups and media that PRS homes are riddled with mould and the landlords and private rented sector are the problem. So with all the challenges and things like that and increased regulation, it's becoming harder for landlords to balance all of these different plates. The housing sector is used to change, but I don't think we've had as much in this quantum leap as we've had in these last few years, as well as economic changes and the challenges that the pandemic has caused. Most private landlords within the current market are looking at the renters reform and considering whether this is an opportunity or is it a threat. In my experience, we're having a lot of private landlords exit the market and invest elsewhere. Private landlords also are not structured to have the benefits in the social sector or local authorities where they can asset borrow, or they are financially structured very different. They're often very small businesses, so they have to have careful ways of setting up their portfolio and their financial structure. Through the pandemic and beyond, a lot of landlords have simply not been able to cope with the financial crisis and with changes to themselves in perhaps family makeup, relationship breakups. This is further impacted on them taking these properties out of the sector. The cost of living crisis is a considerable challenge, with tenants having their heating off due to fuel poverty, causing more issues. And how, as a landlord, can you do much with the resources but to signpost locally for these residents? So we also look at expertise and having expert help with damp and mould and knowing who to go to ensure that improvements and repairs are making the property more energy efficient and is affordable and justified. There are some areas a tenant can apply themselves and it's just a case of permission being granted to that resident. But we also need to make sure that the right people are used for the right jobs and checking credentials. We've also heard a lot about zero tolerance to damp and mould, but in a small percentage of cases, can that be down to the routine of the household? Like talking about the fuel poverty and things like that, what if they're switching everything off and we've done everything that we can to assist with diagnosis? What if we still get complaints? We know that overcrowding and use of property where there's very limited stock of houses make this a very huge and complex situation. So I'm just going to very briefly touch on when we look at a life in a home, and this example gives just for 2 people in a property that are active for 1 day, how much moisture can be created in a property. So imagine if you had this, you've got 21 pints of water for just 2 people in this household. What if you've got overcrowding, smaller space, a lot more personal items, and then furniture and other things against the wall? So whilst we look at the use and occupancy is a high factor, sorry, I think this is just playing through, of causes of moisture in homes, and whilst lots can be done in landlord referencing tenants, we can't always stop issues arising later down the line, and that's what some of the challenges can be. You know, when we look at everyday living, like washing, breathing, cleaning and cooking, without operating anything that's been installed or ignoring ventilation, where will it go? So that's the question for us in the private rented sector. We've also got things like being aware of our building properties, the cold warm points, dew points, leaks, weather, plumbing, whether it's in an area where you might have flooding. That's all sort of like things that can need to be considered when we're looking at the property and the fabric of the building. We need to be looking at the lifespan of items within the home. Guttering is often a cause, especially at winter time. And now we're coming up to winter, it's also going to be like whether residents are saving money to try and turn off their heating. We also need, as a landlord and responsible landlords, to be looking at use of testing and monitoring, which will potentially give an indication of where the issues or weaknesses are within the home, and then how to deal with those issues. We also feel that it's good practice for landlords or agents to conduct regular inspection and note concerns that might not be being raised by the tenants. And it's also about bringing in experts, should they be able to say if there's an issue down to moisture or like heat loss within a home and how to deal with that. I think we also need to have more honest conversations with tenants around education and what they can do themselves in a solution-focused approach. I think it's all about, as we've heard earlier, about collaboration, about having honest conversations between all parties. I also think that there needs to be language changes as well, and not the blame and saying about lifestyle issues. I think we need to be speaking in terms of way of life or household routine, yes, but I think it's not about like pointing fingers at any one thing. I think we need to, as a sector, be looking at collaboration. So there's several options that can be done to try and prevent issues as a landlord, but these all come at a cost to an already stretched landlord. Within some of the things that can be done, there is caps when we look at improvements which would exceed £3,500 for MEES, and trying to get the energy efficiency rating up. And tenants need to also be aware of their own responsibilities, and this means reporting problems as soon as they appear and allowing access for repairs and being able to come in. There's a lot of things that we can use in the sector for prevention and things that can be installed at costs that can be reasonable for landlords and residents. So we need to be working in partnership together to what can we do to eradicate damp and mould. The other consideration is that if we can't do any more to be able to fix the problems, or the asset doesn't comply, or the property doesn't comply, is this a time that the private landlords are looking at selling up? Is that an option? But then if they sell up and exit the market, then what happens? And if you tip the balance of one sector, you're going to tip another balance of another. So I think we need to be looking at education around the landlord world and tenant world, being good record keeping about the property, for these smaller landlords that it might only be like one property or two property, making sure that they've got good quality evidence of everything that's being put in place to try and reduce the risks, We need to encourage and make it easy to report issues straight away to either the landlords or agents in a lot of different variety of ways. You know, we all have busy lives. You know, can we make sure that we are doing things where that they've got proper ways to report things easily to the landlord or agent. We need a history of the property with dates, times of installations, what's been there before or what has been rectified before. I think negotiation with the tenant around expectations, likely causes, honest conversations again, and what's fair and reasonable to expect. A decent home is what we should expect, and that's what landlords should be, and good landlords do provide that. I think also a little bit about tenant expectation. If they're not ventilating or following instruction, no matter what we do, the complaints are going to still remain. And so that is an element that we have in a small percentage. We must be careful not to tip the balance, and the sector needs to find a way forward that benefits all, which we need to be working together and not against each other, in collaboration with one another. So I also wanted to cheekily talk about that we have got our own conference for the HMO Network on the 2nd of November. And thank you very much for listening to everything I've said and the challenges that we have in the private rented sector. I think the biggest message of all is about collaboration and all working together. Thank you.